Hey there, garden friends. It's Heather at Bush Poppy Farm. Hope you are having a great week so far. Today is Wednesday, and we're going to talk about successes and failures in 2022. So it's a beautiful sunny day outside, and I was going to save this video for a bad weather day because we have more of them coming, which is actually really exciting. Lots of rain for the next 4 days, but I went to bed with a migraine last night, woke up with the same migraine, and I do have prescription medication for my migraine, so I took that, and now I am kind of zombified, so there's not much going to happen outside today. So I figured I would just do this video, have a cup of tea, do this video with you guys, and that would be a good way to be somewhat productive. So I have made a list of fails and successes for 2022, as well as things that I want to improve on in 2023. So let's start with fails. I could call them failures, but I'm not going to, because some of it was out of my control. Basically, they're just things that went wrong this year, and there was a lot of them. The first one is just a broad category called critter attack. So last December, I covered all the beds in the garden, like you've seen me do, with row cover because we were going to have lots of frost and more so, just like this year, heavy rain and wind, which we did get. And the one bed that I didn't cover actually had Nigella in it, and it was completely flattened. So I'm glad that everything else was covered. However, I left the covers on for too long. And so then what happened was it became great habitat for rodents. When I took the covers off a couple of weeks later, there was nothing left. All my ranunculus that was looking so beautiful, and the stock and status and everything that was in that bed, snapdragons, I had started so many snapdragons from seed. All of them were eaten down, nothing. There was just little tiny stubs sticking out of the ground. And so I didn't know what to do because that's my spring harvest. So I ordered a bunch of plugs, snapdragon plugs from Farmer Bailey, and they arrived in time for me to plant them. And I did end up having a really good snapdragon season, but it cost me a lot of money because the ones that I lost were all started from seed, which is a lot less expensive than buying from plugs. So, lesson learned, because, and the ranunculus came back, thankfully, and then the ranunculus did great, but that was a whole lot of stress, extra money spent. So the lesson that I learned from that is that I need to, cover for heavy rain, but then uncover. And use a product that you guys have seen me use called Repels All. It's a natural product. It is made of putrefied egg solids, garlic, and I think capsicum, which is pepper. It just smells like garlic, and it's little granules. It looks like sand when you sprinkle it, but it is a deterrent. It doesn't kill anything, doesn't harm anything. It just smells real bad to them, so they go someplace else, and it works really well. You do have to keep applying it. You can't just with any deterrent, critter deterrent, you can't just put it down once and expect it to work. You have to keep using it. I also started using spray peppermint oil around the garden perimeter, and that really worked too. And again, you have to keep applying it. This is not a one-time thing. So birds was the other critter that I started dealing with a lot. They still cause me problems. Birds like to eat the brand new shoots of seedlings, the real green stuff. And they don't necessarily, they pick them apart, they eat some of them. They really like the carrot family, I have discovered. So carrots, Daucus, Queen Anne's lace, that whole family, they really like the green tops of those. So what I do to avoid that is I just cover them either with row cover for a while till they get really established and they have enough leaves so that if the birds come and pick a bit at them, they won't cause a problem. Or I cover them with cloches. I have some wire cloches and some wicker cloches, so plenty of sun and light and water can get in and air, and it just keeps the birds from being able to get to them. And then the final but monstrous critter attack was with deer, but I'm going to get to that in number 2. So number 2 was what I'm calling the COVID cascade. So July 31st was my youngest son's 15th birthday. And that was the day that we all started coming down with COVID. So up to that point, I had been working on getting a deer fence installed because we had seen a lot of deer activity and I'd had some damage. And so we put up a low fence, but it wasn't great because, deer, what they'll do is, number one, they can jump over 8 feet high. In some instances, depending on the ground, they can do 10. So we put up a 4-foot deer fence, but it was deer netting and T-posts. And what they'll do is they'll literally lay on the netting until it kind of bends everything down, and then they could just walk right in. And so that's what they did. I knew that the deer was a problem, and we were working on getting a much bigger barrier put together. In addition to working on building the hoop house, and the hoop house was going to do a lot of exclusion of deer, and I could plant a lot of things that they love to eat in there and not have to worry about them. But I got sick, and Raven really, really wants me to play with her. So she keeps rubbing against my legs, and she's even brought me some of her toys. I've already played with her for over 30 minutes this morning. So she gets a lot of playtime because she's super active, even for an 8-year-old cat. But she's demanding more right now. So we'll see. I may have to take a pause in this video, play with the cat, and then come back. Anyway, the deer and the COVID cascade. So I was out with COVID for 7 days or so. And when I finally got back to the farm, there was total devastation. The deer had broken in everywhere. They literally ate everything. All the zinnias were gone. All the sunflowers were gone. All the greenery and everything, the ornamental grasses, everything that I grew for my fall CSA was gone. In some cases, there were a few sticks left, but for the most part, everything was gone. Trampled, laid on, eaten. It was just all gone. So that was totally devastating because what I had to do is I had to cancel my fall CSA. So I had to call all those subscribers, cancel that subscription, and pay them all back because a CSA you pay in advance for that season. So I lost a lot of money there. But we picked up and kept moving forward. So I finished building the deer fence. It's an 8-foot high deer fence with 2 gates. And it's been up for a couple months now, and they definitely have not made their way in. And we completed the hoop house, and that has been all sealed up as well. And so nobody gets in. We definitely still have rodents running around there and some bunnies, but no deer. So, that kind of ties into a little bit of the successes, but that cascade of events after COVID was really devastating financially, as well as emotionally and mentally. It really did put a damper on the rest of the season. But as is my personality, I only let it get me down for a day or so, and then I made a plan and I moved forward. So that plan was, like I said, putting up the deer fence, finishing the hoop house, canceling the subscriptions and everything, and then getting a move on planting, sowing and planting fall stuff for spring. But then we were hit with another major blow. We were told, actually we weren't told. When I say we, I mean me and the other tenants at the farm space that I rent. In early October, we found out when a for sale sign went up that the landowners were going to sell the property. And there aren't actually many protections. So there's lots of protections in California for renters who rent a home to live in, a house, an apartment, whatever. But there's not that many protections for renting property. So even though they assured us after we confronted them with, well, you told us you weren't selling, why are you selling? They told us that our leases would be intact, but there was no guarantee of that. The new owner could easily, within his rights, come in and nullify our leases. And so for people, for me, that was major, because this was October when I needed to put everything in the ground for spring. If I did that, put all my stuff in the ground in October, there, not knowing what was going to happen, he could come along, the new owner could come along and say, oh, your lease is terminated, you need to be out in 30 days. And I would be out my entire spring harvest and some of my summer. So for that month of October, things were really crazy. It was extremely stressful. I ended up replanting the front of my home garden, which I was going to turn into just a garden. I ended up planting that all out so that I could have flowers for spring guaranteed. And I started making plans to start disassembling the hoop house and all that kind of stuff. And then a couple of weeks in, I think the whole process was about 3 weeks, we found out that they weren't going to sell, and that they definitely were never going to sell. So all that stress, and pushing my timeline back. So I did end up, finally, after all of that happened, I ended up planting the hoop house only. Tulips, ranunculus, you guys can see the videos on this channel, the planting, what I put in there. So the hoop house is all planted. And the front garden is all planted. So I have guaranteed spring blooms. I did not plant the upper field because I'm saving that to put in early summer stuff so that I have a succession. I don't have a barren time, basically, when the spring is ending and nothing is blooming yet for summer. So there'll be overlap this way. Anyway, so, all of that got done, and we're in a good place right now, but it was a very stressful year. My lesson out of that whole farm sale potential thing is that now I know what I will demand as a renter if I ever lease again. I know exactly what I'm going to ask for. Number one, that I'm going to require that the landlords have to give me 9 months notice of intent to sell or intent to terminate my lease. 9 months, because my stuff goes in the ground. I have that long a period of time before harvest where I can actually make money on what I put money in. So it's a long life cycle. So if anybody out there is thinking of renting their land to a farmer or somebody who wants to expand their growing business, keep that in mind. This is not a 30 days in and out type of business. We put stuff in the ground and it takes time. It takes time for those things to mature, to grow, to bloom, to fruit, to where we can then see the return on our investment. So that's one thing I will definitely be adding in or demanding in any future leases, as well as a bunch of other protections that I'm not going to bother going into here, but I learned a lot through that process. And the other lesson I learned is it's time for us to start looking for our own land that we own, that we don't have to answer to a landowner for, because we're the ones and we'd be making the decisions. But that's going to take a lot of time. Land is extremely scarce around here and it's very, very expensive. So, in the meantime, I'm going to stay where I'm at. I have another full year on that lease. It expires January 2024. Come October, when I need to start planting for 2024, I will be able to make an evaluation of whether it makes sense for me to stay there, or to look for a new place, or to, I don't know, we'll see. We'll see where we're at. So that was the lessons from my failures this year. It was a pretty big year, a lot more complex than just growing here at home. Even though I had more space, I actually didn't get a single harvest out of the farm yet because I lost it all to deer. So I hope that this year is different and that all of the time and money that I have spent and effort will come to fruition this coming year. That's the goal, at least. So that was the depressing part first. Now let's talk about successes. My first success, effectively planning for vacation. This sounds crazy, but my first year of being a flower farmer, I didn't know how things were going to come into production and when, my peak harvest season was going to be. None of that. That was all new information to me. And so that first year, we took our summer vacation. I think it was towards the end of July. My kids go back to school in like early August, like August 8th or whatever. So I think it was like the last 2 weeks of July. Well, turns out that's like peak production for my summer stuff. And so I had, a friend taking care of the garden and everything, and she was cutting for me to keep things producing, but that was a lot of potential revenue lost. Whereas there's kind of a bit of a slump in between spring and summer, although hopefully not this year because hopefully I have succession planned correctly. So for 2022, I planned to take our summer vacation the first 2 weeks after the kids got out of school. They get out of school May 28th, I think, May 29th this year they got out. So we took our summer vacation those first 2 weeks of June. And that actually worked out a lot better. Things were still pumping, things were still really growing and everything, but I was able to schedule in advance with all my CSA people. They knew that that was the break between spring session and summer session. It worked out way better. So I think that's going to be the same for this coming year. That will be our trip window. So we'll see. It's also kind of nice because beginning of June, it's usually not scorching hot in most places where we want to go. So that's helpful as well. So that felt like a success because it's really hard when you are growing things for a living to plan times to get away from the farm. Like for me, I want to be here all the time. I enjoy it, but my husband is like, needs to get out, needs to get away. And so in the winter, that's not really a big issue because everything I'm growing is dormant or just kind of chilling and I don't need to be harvesting. So winter is great, but the kids don't have a huge amount of time off during the winter. I mean, we have holiday break, but it's a different thing. So in the summer, I wanted to make sure that I planned correctly so that I could go away and not feel super stressed and anxious. I mean, I still was a bit anxious, but that's just me, about what was happening back on the farm. So that to me was a success. My second success was very surprising based on the failure. So earlier I talked about critter damage to my snapdragons and my ranunculus, and they really were completely decimated. That bed looked empty, even though it had been fully planted. But when I put the, I ordered the plugs, the snapdragon plugs, I put all of those in the ground, the ranunculus rebounded, and I ended up having a wonderful year of both those varieties of flowers. I got really long stems, really, really strong production out of all the plants. The ranunculus produced well into April, May. And the snapdragons kept going until I pulled them out. They had rust and they looked kind of crappy on the leaves, but the flowers themselves looked great. The rust didn't happen until later in the year, but they hung on basically until I pulled them out. They would have kept producing. Not as much as the first two flushes, but they were great. So I felt like, okay, this is good. I seem to know what I'm doing with these two varieties, these two types of flowers, and they really produced well for me. So I'm hoping that I'll have similar luck this year. You just never know. But the ranunculus are growing at the farm this year in the high tunnel, and they're huge right now because it's warmer in there. And so I might have much earlier blooms than I did this year out in the field. So it'll be interesting to see. Okay, so the next success was weddings. I do not do full service weddings. I do DIY weddings and a la carte. And so those two varieties are much less cost for couples. The DIY is basically they buy buckets of blooms from me and it's whatever I have in the field. And then they make all their own stuff. And then the a la carte variety wedding is that they can buy buckets of blooms in addition to requesting things like a bridal bouquet, bridesmaids bouquets, boutonnieres, corsages, centerpieces, etc., where I'll make all that stuff for them and then they just come and pick it up or I deliver it to them. But I don't do setup, I don't do cleanup, I don't do big installations, none of that stuff. I don't do full service weddings for a lot of reasons. One, I like my weekends. And if you do weddings, you're giving up your weekends. Two, it is a lot of work, and one person cannot do it all. I don't have a team, it's just me. I have no employees. I could hire contractors, but I'm not there yet. I'm not at the point where I can afford to pay skilled people the wage they deserve for this kind of work. So I'll get there eventually, but I still don't think I would take on full service weddings. It's just not me. The other thing with full service weddings is you really are with that couple, kind of holding their hands throughout the whole process. So it's a lot of engagement. With the DIY and a la carte options, I do an estimate for them. I'll send them like a lookbook kind of thing. They can, they sign off on the contract, and then we don't talk again until 2 weeks before their wedding, when I check in with them, we find out where I'm delivering or when they're picking up, and then that's kind of it. So I can do more with less effort as a single person. So it works out really well. I do offer consultation. So one of the things that DIY brides have been doing, and this is really fun, is they've been saying, okay, as part of our bridal shower, instead of holding it earlier before the wedding, we're going to do it like 2 days before and get the whole wedding party together, or just the bridesmaids or whatever. And they all make, the bouquets, etc., together. And so it's kind of fun. But sometimes people would like some help with that. So I can go as a consultant, they'll pay me to be there for their party, and I'll help them learn how to build those pieces. So that's an additional add-on. And then people can also rent vases and things from me. But that's as far as I go. So weddings were a big success this year. I did 8 weddings this year, 2022. And so it's interesting. I've already booked my first wedding for next year, so that's exciting. And we'll see how that grows. I kind of am not, the way I'm treating this business is I'm letting it grow organically. In other words, as things come to me as opportunities, I take the ones that feel good and we'll see where they go. So I'm doing more, getting my flowers out there in bulk to more and more places where they're offering people to build their bouquets by the stem, come to their business and hey, it's bouquet day, come build a bouquet, and they pay by the stem. So I'm being able to do more interesting things that are not that like on the normal sales channels of flower farmers. And because it's just me, and because I have a very small space, I mean, I'm growing in less than a quarter acre. I mean, it's a small amount of space. So I can only produce so much. And, I need to be careful about the things I say yes to. But I'm also trying to maximize what I produce. And one way I've been doing that is finding these new channels. And some of them just kind of happen by. One of my new sales channels is dried flowers. And I sell those as bouquets, as posies, as decorative pieces, like this year when I did these pumpkins, right? They sold at the local nursery in their gift shop. As well as all the posies and things. So that's dried flowers is a whole other aspect that I hadn't known I could go into. And it's great because instead of just pulling flowers that are almost done, can't go into a fresh bouquet, and composting them, I can dry them and they get a second life basically. So it's a great way of kind of extending the harvest, but also bringing in extra revenue for the business. So that was another success. And then I also want to say the hoop house was definitely a success in a lot of ways, because it wasn't just that now I have a covered place that I can control stuff to grow in. It was more that we did that ourselves, right? So it was me, Griffin, my husband, my kids, my brother-in-law. We all worked on it together, following some instructions, but basically piecing things together from an existing half set of hoops. We had to build additional ones. We basically were kind of learning as we went, and we really DIY'd it, but it's working. It's working great. And I'm excited about having that space. That felt like a very big achievement. So, you know, in the future, if I ever get property of my own and have bigger space, I know I can put these up now, and they'll be easier because in the future, it'll all be the same parts instead of pieces of this, pieces of that. So that also is really cool. So I feel like we gained a big skill set in doing that. So that was really exciting. So things I want to improve on for 2023, succession planting. And not just for the flower business. I've kind of got the flower thing down. I think I'm you know, with my seed starting, like I went over the other day in that video, I have successions of, let's say, zinnias. There'll be 3 or 4 successions of zinnias. So I'll start those seeds. Over time, I do succession planting of sunflowers, etc. So I've kind of got that down. But I'm not really good at doing that in the vegetable garden. And I want to get good at doing that in the vegetable garden so that I have food for more of the year. So that's something I want to work on this year as well. Honing in on varieties. So in the vegetable garden, I can be experimental and try lots of different things, and a little bit of here, a little bit there, all that kind of stuff. You can do that in the flower business as well, but it makes more fiscal sense and more sense for your customers if you hone in on varieties, species, and colors, so that you don't have, you know, 30 or 40 of this, 30 or 40 of that. So that instead you have 1,000 of this and 1,000 of that. It just makes more sense. So the first couple of years, first 2 to 3 years of flower growing is really kind of figuring out which types of flowers you enjoy growing, grow best for you in your area, your environment, and also narrowing down your color selections. Because while it's nice to have mixes and stuff, if you're doing things like weddings, you want more of fewer options, if that makes sense. Because you're talking about needing hundreds of stems of a particular flower in that particular color for a single event, right? So it makes more sense to narrow those things down. And then it's pretty easy to present to your potential clients, like, this is what we're growing, these are our color options, and they can decide whether that's gonna work for them or not. One nice thing about this wedding that I have booked for April 1st, sorry, dry throat, is that it's far enough in advance that the stuff that she's interested in, I can start seeds for, and she can actually have stuff. Usually I say it's just whatever's available in the field at the time of your event is what you're gonna get. But in this case, I can plan in advance for her and actually start growing what she wants. Just like the client that we just finished their fall planting in their house, in their garden, we're gonna do some late spring planting for them of dahlias and cosmos and eryngium and some other stuff. And I'm gonna grow that stuff from seed for her because I have time to do it. So that's kind of nice to have that, that kind of time frame to work with, so that you can kind of guarantee, as long as you don't have a crop failure, that your customers are gonna get, you know, what they want. That is my list of fails and successes for 2022. And even though there was exciting things this year, like back in February, getting access to the farm and knowing I could expand my business and expanding my business and, you know, really growing it. But there was also all those, you know, setbacks, and it was challenging. It was a challenging year, but it was a fulfilling year. And I feel like I'm in a good place to start 2023 in terms of everything that I've planted. I'm excited to start growing, you know, just next month in January, I could starting seeds. So that's exciting because the whole process is starting again. And I'm looking forward to all the things I can grow vegetable-wise this year, because I'm gonna have more space. That is super, super exciting to me, because I'm converting the front from being flower business and a little bit of vegetable. It's gonna be all, you know, edibles plus the chickens. The farm is just going to be the whole business. So that's really exciting because I can grow a lot more because those 4x4 raised beds, I can grow a lot in there, but it's kind of hard to do successions in that small space. And so, you know, you plant the peas, once the peas are done, then there's no more peas, right? So like if I can do successions of peas, successions of radishes and all the lettuces and all that kind of stuff, if I can do that better, then I'll have more food for longer. Also looking forward to having a larger space to grow tomatoes. And I'm going to try the Florida weave method this year, so I'll go over that if you haven't seen that. And really looking forward to having the space to grow squashes, not zucchini, because those grow fine for me, but winter squashes and pumpkins. I'll have the space for that this year. And I'm excited because they did well at the farm. And I might still plant some out there too. But those have been something I've been wanting to grow forever, and I just have never succeeded. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Also, we'll potentially get a little bit of asparagus this year. We have a whole bunch of new fruit trees out there. They may or may not produce fruit this year. I don't actually expect them to produce much at all this year. And if they do, technically I should be pulling those off before they mature so that those trees can put all of their energy into roots and become strong plants. Then they can give us fruit, and it won't take too much energy away from the tree trying to grow. So that is the goal there. So thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I know that it wasn't a very exciting video because we're just sitting here talking, but it's really important to go over the things that you think failed and what you learned from them, as well as your successes and the things you'd like to improve on for the following year. Those are great things to dig into, whether you are a gardener, a farmer, you know, an IT expert, whatever you do for a living. Looking over your year is important and can be really eye-opening as well. It can also, in terms of being eye-opening, can also be really cool because sometimes you focus on your failures or the things that didn't go right. And then when you start writing down the things that did go right, you might be really surprised to find that it's a lot better than you thought. So I hope that you experiment with this little process of self-illumination and dig into your fails and successes, lessons learned, and things that you want to carry into 2023 yourself. Have a great time in your own garden, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.